So I just want to do a video debunking some of the lies that I've seen thrown around lately about forest fires, especially by the more libertarian slash conspiracy theorist contingent of the right wing. And it's gotten out of hand. Like some of the things they're saying about forest fires are like flat earth tier in terms of the level of bullshit that they're spreading. So first off, okay, some background on the issue. Forest fires have been massively increasing in the last 3 years in North America. It's gotten to be a fucking disaster. Like to be honest, I feel like on a personal level, forest fire smoke has negatively impacted my life more than any other trend in the last few years because it's actually like it's ruining fucking Canada and the United States, frankly. Like it's getting to the point where our summers are just one big haze of forest fire smoke, especially out west, but even increasingly in the eastern regions. Um, it's ruining the national parks. It's ruining just daily life. It's gross. It's disgusting. It makes everything shitty. It's filthy. Like it looks disgusting. It feels disgusting when you're breathing it in. Like it's just awful. Like people complain about cities being polluted, but this forest fire smoke is honestly worse than any kind of like industrial pollution that I've encountered in a city. Um like it's awful. Like it is absolute shit and I fucking hate it. Like I mean, people talk about crime rates rising, but personally like forest fire smoke has negatively impacted my life more than crime. I'm just going to be fucking honest. Like it has. Um like it's made the fucking national parks in Canada one giant haze of smoke, and it's even threatening to do the same where I live in Ontario. I mean, it has in other parts of Ontario and Quebec and the eastern United States over and Atlantic Canada over the last few years. Like it keeps getting worse and worse. And it's obviously linked to rising temperatures because we've had record Western Canada and parts of the Western United States have had record heat over the last 3 years. Uh, Not to mention some of the more northern regions of Eastern Canada. Not where I live. Bizarrely, where I live, we haven't had heat waves in the last few summers in southern Ontario, but other parts of the continent most definitely have. For some reason, we keep dodging the actual heat waves, although we haven't fully dodged the forest fire smoke that is the result of heat waves in other places. Um, but yeah, I mean the climate in British Columbia and Alberta and Washington and Oregon, it literally changed overnight. Like they say climate change is a gradual thing, but it wasn't gradual there. It actually did happen literally like all of a sudden because they had a really terrible heat wave in late June 2021. Temperatures got as high as 49 Celsius in parts of British Columbia, which is totally unheard of. The previous record for BC and for Canada as a whole was 44 Celsius, and that was in like the 1930s or something. So it's 5 degrees higher than the previous record for Canada. Records were shattered all across the Pacific Northwest in Oregon, Washington, etc. It was a mess, and things haven't returned to normal since. Like they haven't had a heat wave as bad as that one since, but they've had many other heat waves that were still bad. And the overall temperature, especially during the summer and also even to some extent the spring and fall, has just been much higher now than it used to be. So they literally had turbo climate change like overnight. And again, you have these people on the right who are actually saying there's no link between heat and forest fires. That is the dumbest thing ever. Like, it is basic knowledge of physics that heat makes fires spread more. That is just like 101 level knowledge of science. Like, I mean, you'd have to be pretty dumb to deny that there's a link between heat and flammability. That's like I don't even have words for that. That is honestly flat earth tier. Now, thankfully not all of them are making that argument. Like you'd have to be really dumb to make that argument, but not all of them are. The arguments that I see the people who are a little bit smarter making are that it's linked to bad forest management and that the fires are started on purpose. Um, Now, here's the thing. Okay. Bad forest management, that part is partly true. However, some of the bad forest management can actually be blamed on the logging companies themselves. And we all know that these libertarian types never want to blame private industry for anything. But the fact is, these logging companies are at least partly responsible because they want the trees to be spruce trees and pine trees because those are the better trees for logging, for paper. So what they do is when they cut down the forest, they replant it with this monoculture of only pine trees because that's what's best for logging. And these monocultures of only pine trees are more flammable. So it is partly bad forest management, but it's not entirely on the part of the government, which is, of course, what the libertarians, what their narrative is. It's always the government's fault, 100%. It's never the private industry's fault. I mean, truth be told, the government and private industries are kind of one entity to some extent. It might vary depending on which industry we're talking about. But the thing is, yes, the private sector is partly responsible here, the logging industry specifically, and their practices. Like, yeah, that absolutely is a factor here. Fuck. Now, obviously, like, there's complicated issues here. Like, personally, like, I know in some of the national parks, they have kind of the monoculture also of only pine trees. And I admit there is a certain aesthetic quality to it. Like, there is a certain beauty to it. But at the same time, like, do we need this monoculture everywhere? And it's not usually in the national parks where these fires start. It's usually in the regions outside of the national parks, but that are part of the same general mountain range or ecosystem. So, I mean, I do think in some of these areas, like, not necessarily right at the, like, in the national parks themselves, but maybe outside of the national parks, we could be thinking about, planting a more diverse range of trees, and maybe even strategic clear cutting of certain areas to stop the fire from spreading too much, like creating corridors between the forests where there's just no trees to stop the fires from spreading excessively. Like, there's a lot more we could be doing. And I don't deny that bad forest management is part of the problem. However, here's the thing. A lot of these fires are happening in the absolute middle of nowhere. Regions where forest management isn't a thing and never was a thing because people just don't live there. So, and these regions never had forest fires to the same extent they do now. I mean, they've had bad forest fires in the past, but it's just getting worse and worse with each passing year. And I'm talking like northern Canada, remote parts of Alaska, Yukon, BC, Northwest Territories, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, just really remote areas where nobody lives or hardly anyone lives. And it's like, we can't just say that this is a forest management issue because these forests were never really managed to begin with, but yet the fires are getting worse. It is a heat issue. It is a climate issue, a dryness issue, and a heat issue. Like, that's what is making these fires spread more. Like, even if all other factors were the same, dryness and heat makes the fires just spread more. That's the facts. So, like, it's all these things combined, really, but denying the role of fire, of heat and dryness as a catalyst is just fucking stupid. Because it's a huge catalyst. Not only that, but the narrative that the fires are all being started on purpose, like by leftists, is just insane. It's like, you think leftists are somehow going into the middle of nowhere in the Northwest Territories and starting fires there, places that are like hundreds of miles from any road where these fires begin. Somehow these Antifa or whatever are so well equipped, they have like helicopters that they're taking to the middle of nowhere in the Northwest Territories or Yukon or whatever. I'm sorry, I just don't buy that. That is just far-fetched beyond belief. Like, there may have been isolated incidents, like, yes, sometimes arsonists do start fires, like you have, mentally ill people. You could have people with political motives, although I would say it's probably more mental illness than anything if people are starting fires on purpose. But yeah, I mean, the vast majority, a lot of these fires originate from very remote places, and it's obvious that it's not people starting them because there just aren't people in these locations. So, like, again, like, that's another thing. It's such flagrant bullshit. And it's a cope. it's a fucking cope. All these like people just can't face the fact that like maybe there's holes in their ideology. Like in their ideology that like, oh, growth is good, the free market is good, letting the chips fall where they may is good. Oh, if only we had minimal government or no government, then everything would just turn out fine. Maybe there's just holes in that ideology. Maybe some of the problems are like maybe some of the problems are caused by the private sector. Maybe some of the problems are caused by the free market, by this idea of infinite greed and infinite growth. This idea of a growth-based economy. Maybe that's part of the problem. Population growth and the accompanying ideology of endless economic growth. Like that we just have to keep growing the GDP. We have to keep expanding, building more shit, and just destroying nature and pumping all kinds of filth into the air to facilitate this growth. Absolutely. Maybe that is part of the problem. So yeah, as I've said, on a personal level, I feel forest fires ultimately affect me more negatively right now than any other issue. That could change in the future, Like, I mean, fuck, if I get drafted to go fight against Russia, that would obviously be the bigger problem on a personal level. But, I mean, or if the war just keeps expanding, that could become the new biggest problem. But I'm just saying, like right now, forest fires to me are the biggest problem on a personal level. And they threaten to get worse and worse. Like every summer could be worse than the last in terms of just the sheer amount of this fucking filthy smoke in the air. And I mean, people say like, oh, you just learn to live with it. It's like, fuck you, okay? No. It's filthy and it's disgusting. And it's like, one good thing about Canada, like in the past, is that we've had very clean air, and now that's being completely ruined. We are going to become one of the countries with like the worst air quality on the entire planet at the rate things are going, and parts of the United States as well. So like honestly, like this is a fucking mess, and I'm sick of the lies, I'm sick of the copes.